What's up guys? In this video you're gonna learn why I leased my Maserati and why I bought my Range Rover. Stay tuned. So let's clarify something. I did not lease and buy them at the same time. Almost 4 years ago now, I leased my Maserati. The first reason why I did that is I was single, I was doing well financially, and quite honestly, I wanted a really cool car. For me, I wanted a car that no one else really had, and as you have seen on all the Instagram and any social media, most influencers have nice cars. While that may be the case, for me, it was because I was single and I was living that type of lifestyle, so it really just felt right to have a car like that. Now, let's talk about why I actually leased that Maserati. First and foremost, I went in with the intention of looking at a lease or a purchase. Now, ultimately, I wanted to make sure my monthly payments were as low as I could get them, but I also wanted to make sure my out-of-pocket expense was also as low as I could get it. Again, back to the point, I was single, I had no wife, I had no kids, and that money, well, I'm not saying it was best used for a car like that, but I can tell you, I didn't have any other obligations that I had to use my money for. So with that said, when I sat down at the Maserati dealership, I simply played pro and con for both scenarios. The salesman mapped out exactly my costs, my out-of-pocket expenses for the purchase, and they did it also for the lease. And here's what happened. And this training isn't about pros of leases and pros of cons, but I'll tell you what I went through and why I made that decision. First of all, on that lease, there was no sales tax. So I saved a good amount of money on sales tax at that price point of car. Secondly, the out-of-pocket expense out front was less. I would have to come out more out of pocket to buy the vehicle than I was going to simply lease the vehicle. When it comes down to it, even though I was buying or leasing a very expensive car, I still wanted to save as much money as possible and make a good financial decision. So in that case, there was a pro for leasing. Now, what comes next is the fact that I was looking for monthly payments in a certain price range. I knew where my price range was. You should always know that when you're going into either leasing or buying a vehicle, and I wanted to stay in that price range. So when I measured up the monthly cost for the purchase as well as the monthly cost for the lease, ultimately the lease was just incrementally higher, not enough to move my needle, and was actually still within my monthly budget. And so because of that, the fact that I had less money down and was in my monthly budget, although very fractionally incrementally higher than if I would have went with a loan and purchased the vehicle, financially it made a lot more sense for me to lease this vehicle than buy. Now let's bring up point two. At the end of the day, I find now that I'm 39, I tend to go through cars about every 3 years. Now, my Maserati was the first vehicle I've ever leased. I've never leased a vehicle before that. I've always purchased vehicles. But if I looked at my own track record of how I used cars, I would tend to turn cars over every 3 years. Well, this lease was a 3-year lease. And so then I took the next step when not just analyzing the economics of it, I said, how am I gonna be utilizing this car and for how long? As I mentioned previously in this training, I was single, I had no wife, and I was living the fun playboy lifestyle, if you would. And so I also knew that to some level that was gonna come to an end, and so I wanted to take advantage of that lifestyle in a fast car, and a sports car, and an Italian car. But I also knew at some point I was gonna turn that car over and probably have some different type of car. And so I knew within the next 3 years was that car, I ultimately was gonna give that car up for something else. So again, that played into my decision-making factor, meaning I did not wanna keep that car long-term. I personally was only gonna keep the car 3 years, maybe 4 years max. And obviously you can continue on with a lease even after your lease terms, and you can buy it out from the dealership if I wanted. So it's not that I had to turn it in after the lease was over, so I had that option. So again, to recap, the lease was 3 years. The price point monthly was in my monthly budget, as well it was less expensive out of pocket at the front end. So far, it made all the reasonable sense for me to actually lease this vehicle. And lastly, it was a brand new Maserati, straight off the dealership floor. No one has ever driven it, and to buy a brand new car doesn't usually make sense because those 2 or 3 years is when all of the massive percentage of depreciation happens. If you buy a $100,000 car or more, there is a massive depreciation in that first 3 years. So if I were to have bought that Maserati, I would have experienced a massive depreciation, a much larger out-of-pocket expense monthly, and although I would have been saving a very little bit of money every month, honestly, probably less than my Starbucks budget, it didn't make sense to take that type of depreciation on that asset. Cars are always depreciating. As you well know, I'm in real estate. In real estate, you're always looking for appreciation. Now, let's move on to why I bought my Range Rover. Now, for the same reasons that I leased my Maserati, I actually decided to buy the Range Rover. You just have to inverse all the reasoning. First and foremost, I had to come out zero added dollars to buy the Range Rover. Not a single dollar out of my pocket to close the deal and have the keys to my car. Secondly, it was in my monthly budget. I didn't have to come out another dollar on my monthly expenses based around the loan that I was approved for. So again, no money out of pocket and the same monthly budget that I was comfortable paying, I was actually able to get. Now here's the twist in the story. As I told you previously, 3+ years ago, 4 years ago, I was single. Now I am married. And so as I had the chance to either turn in my Maserati or buy out my Maserati, it made a whole lot more sense to have a more reasonable family type car because I knew me and my wife were gonna have a family soon. And so I was thinking forward a little bit, looking around the corner, if you will, and realized we were probably gonna have a kid sometime soon. And so when that decision came, I definitely wanted the SUV. Quite frankly, the story goes, I was actually in the market for a Range Rover 4 years ago. The salesman was absolutely god-awful. I walked next door and I ended up with a Maserati. So actually, for the last 4 years anyways, I still have always wanted my Range Rover. And then again, I didn't want to buy a brand new Range Rover for 2 simple reasons. 1, depreciation. A brand new Range Rover, just like all cars, is gonna have a huge depreciation right on the onset of that term, meaning the first 1, 2, 3 years. So if I have a 5-year loan, the massive amount of depreciation comes in the first 3 years. Well, if I am looking to turn that car over every 3 years, which has been my history, which is what I've always done, then I'm gonna take a massive hit when it's time to actually exit that car, and I don't look forward to that. So I found a car less than 2 years old that I absolutely fell in love with. My wife absolutely fell in love with. I personally do not care and I do not absolutely need a brand new car. And again, it had in my price range as well as it had low miles. So I knew that the car was gonna last for quite some time. Now what I did, because it is a Range Rover, I actually did extend my 5-year warranty, even though there was less than 2 years on the car, and it had incredible mileage, incredibly low mileage, but I really wanted to make sure I was protected because as we all know, the higher price the car, the more exotic the car, the more those breakdowns cost money. So I actually did finance another 5-year warranty, and I again did not have to come out of pocket to have that extended warranty. When it's all said and done, I made the reasonable decision, and in my opinion, the financially better decision to buy a less than 2-year-old Range Rover, and to be able to do it for the family reasons, because as I record this video right now, my wife actually is pregnant. So all things are coming to fruition. It was in my buy box. I did not have to come out of pocket for a single penny. I financed the extra 5-year long warranty. And for all those reasons, it made a lot more sense to buy the car, on top of the fact that likely we are gonna be moving on to another car in the next 3 years as our family potentially is going to expand. So that is why buying the Range Rover versus leasing a brand new Range Rover made a whole lot more sense. Now, something I have not talked about is my driving miles. Now, again, as I was single and I did not have, family and kids to commute to soccer practice and baseball practice and all these other things on top of work, I knew I wasn't gonna drive over my mileage limits when I leased the vehicle. When I looked at the Range Rover and I now have a wife and a newborn child on its way and potentially another one there soon after, I also realized keeping under 10,000 miles a year might start to become a challenge, and I didn't want to take that risk on, because in a lease, you will have to pay for overages in your miles driven. So I realized where I was going, looking around that corner again, and said, you know what, with all things considered, it makes a whole lot more sense to actually buy a used vehicle than to lease a new vehicle, between the economics and obviously the reality of how I'm gonna be driving now. So to sum it all up, at the end of the day, you should drive the car you can afford first and foremost. Do not buy or lease a car you can't afford because it looks cool. Secondly, drive a car you really want or love because it will make you feel good. I'm not always about the flash, although I do like nice things, and I do believe there's a massive, massive, massive value in feeling good in what you wear, what you're driving, and overall well-being of yourself. There is a value in that, although you can't always put a dollar sign on it. And lastly, you should be thinking through where you're going to be going when you buy or lease a vehicle. Don't think about the right now, think about what is soon to come. Like I mentioned, I know I'm going to continue to grow my family, which means driving will probably increase, which means I will need larger cars, maybe multiple cars, depending upon how big it gets. And so it made more fiscal, financial, and just economic sense for me to have an SUV as well as to buy a used car for looking around that future and looking around that corner, I should say. So with all that said, guys, it's really your decision, but you need to make sure that it makes sense financially and it makes sense for your personal situation and that you love the car. Hopefully this is a good video for you. Again, go out there, do your research, find the car that really works, make sure it works economically for you, and I'll see you guys on the next training video. Peace.